Well, welcome to the Shaun Newman Show on the Western Standard. To the podcast listener, that's going to be they're going to have to, clean out their ears. That is right. It is live on the Western Standard instead of the podcast, which is behind my head. It's the Shaun Newman Show. So welcome aboard. And I got to welcome aboard three guests for the inaugural roundtable here on the Shaun Newman Show: Mike Dalke, David Parker, and Vitor Marciano. So, fellas, first off, thanks for hopping on with me.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Now,
Great to be here.
Now, there's going to be two forms of this. Obviously, a few people are going to watch. Your names are sitting there for everybody to see who they're listening to. But if they are hopped onto the podcast and are only listening to your voice, I want to start with just a little background, quick, short, however long, short you want to go. And we'll start with Mike. We'll go around the table, and then we'll hop into what today is going to be about, a little bit of the UCP election here as we inch closer to October 6th. So we'll start with Mr. Mike Dalke.
Yeah, sure. So Mike Dalke here. I've been around conservative politics for quite some time. Really got into it during the leadership race with Jason Kenney and his unification of the party. From that, I kind of got myself involved in some campaigns here in South Edmonton. Became kind of a little bit of a political strategist. Worked with Casey Madu in South Edmonton to actually get him elected as our only MLA in Edmonton, both as his president in Southwest, as well as his campaign manager for a little bit of time. Now I've kind of rolled my dice at some other parts, worked on the municipal election, trying to help conservatives have a voice here in Edmonton. Unfortunately, it didn't go as well as we thought it would go. Only got one candidate elected in the last election, so we were a little disappointed by that. But still working to build a conservative bastion here in Edmonton. And so in the meantime, I've got myself back into some candidates. Opportunities. So we've been working with Castle Downs. So now the president in Castle Downs here in Edmonton, and I'm working with our candidate, John Zadek, who used to be the city councillor here in Edmonton, to hopefully get him elected as the next UCP member of the legislature over there in Castle Downs. And then on the side, I do a little work, obviously strategizing for a lot of teams. So a couple teams have approached me during the leadership race. And so right now I work quite heavily with the Todd Lowen campaign and helping them with some strategies and moving forward with them. So that's kind of who I am and what I do.
We'll switch over to Mr. David Parker.
Hey, everyone. My name is David Parker. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Executive Director of Take Back Alberta, co-host of the Canadian Story, and an entrepreneur from Central Alberta who's been a political organizer since about 18 and just very interested in teaching people about how democracy in our province works so they can take back control of their institutions that I think a lot of them don't think represent their views or values anymore.
And finally, Vitor Marciano.
I'm Vitor Marciano. I've been kicking around federal and provincial politics in Alberta for 22 years. I started off, frankly, like David, like Mr. Dalke, as a volunteer. And in the early 2000s, I became sort of one of the key organizers in the Edmonton area for the federal party. Served on that first federal national council. In 2010, Danielle Smith asked me to stop doing federal work and professionalize the Wild Rose Party. So I was its first professional executive director, and then served as one of Danielle's senior advisors and her press secretary. I was around when Brian Jean came back and put Wild Rose back together again in 2015. And I've been doing politics ever since. I've been a campaign manager. I've been a strategist. I'm a jack of all trades. I know a bunch of these different technical things. And I've also been a senior executive at the federal party nationally and the executive director of one of the precursor parties provincially. So I know both the political strategic side and the administrative paperwork, get stuff done side of parties. So I have some insights on some of this stuff.
Well, I appreciate you fellas exploring an idea with me. Was born and raised in Saskatchewan. The listeners of the podcast certainly know that, but anyone on the Western Standard side, this is my first, election in Alberta, essentially. And so I've been monitoring it very closely, shall we say. And that's why I appreciate you guys hopping on. And from now on, I talk about it being ping pong, where I ask Mike a question, then he brings it back to me, and then David, and blah, blah, blah. At any time, feel free to hop in and share some thoughts. This is a roundtable. It's a virtual roundtable, but a roundtable nonetheless. I've been watching this and talking to people such as all three of you about the 123,915 UCP members. That's what's going to decide, give or take, the upcoming election, which is going to be decided on October 6th. When you look at the numbers, fellas, 60,000+ new members since May. Is that normal? Does this happen every election, that you just get a big swell of members like this? Or is this maybe kind of due to circumstances? And I'll fire at Vitor to start, but David and Mike, please hop in as we roll along with this.
Leadership races always bring out extra people. So the UCP being at 125,000 isn't really a surprise. In all honesty, if it hadn't happened in the summer, it would have been bigger. If it had, if the party hadn't restricted the sales of memberships to just people using their own personal credit card or personal check, it would have been bigger. They actually did things that probably stopped the party from growing as much as it could have.
Why do you say? Sorry, Vitor. Why do you say summer? What's big about the summer, fellas?
People go and live their lives.
Yeah, they want to go on vacation. Like, most people can't be bothered to care about politics, and if you ask them to bother to care, when they want to be at the beach or at the cottage or in their RV camping, they're not interested.
Even with the hardest 2 years behind us, even with everything that's going on, you're telling me this is just standard operations for politics? 60,000+ new members, doubling the size of the party. That's standard. The fact it's summer, they probably would have been higher. All these things. I'll
give you an example. Aaron O'Toole, who most people would say couldn't even have inspired, he didn't win. Let's just say he didn't win. Even then, they doubled the membership for the leadership. Like, that leadership with Peter MacKay and Aaron O'Toole federally, they doubled the membership. Now, what Pierre Poilievre has done has been shocking. That's unprecedented. It's movement level. But I don't think you could say that doubling of the membership is very shocking.
No, I would agree 100%. Not everyone is a political junkie like the rest of us here on this roundtable, and we don't spend our time, checking podcasts and watching all sorts of news articles. I mean, I watched the Notley news conference today. I think was the only one watching it today. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, people like us, we get into this. The average Albertan, they want to go to the lake. They want to spend time with their family. The benefit of having 7 candidates, though, in this leadership election is that there are 7 candidates selling memberships. I think, honestly, the numbers probably would have been much lower if we didn't have all 7 candidates. So we are pretty lucky that we do have 7 candidates, even though it has kind of muddied the waters, so to speak.
So I'm the green guy. Everybody says nobody's political junkies like us, but fellas, look on the wall. They're hockey jerseys. I didn't give 2 shits about this like 6 months ago. You're telling me I'm sitting here and my eyes are still shut to what actually happens in politics. Like, I have no clue.
Yes. And political parties and political people are who normal people hire to do politics.
Yeah.
And most of the time, normal people don't give a damn about politics. I mean, I think there's an American stat that the average American thinks about federal politics for about 1.5 minutes a week. And it's less for state politics and municipal politics. And that applies to Canada as well. So normally they just don't care. And it's not that they don't care. They don't care enough to involve themselves, and they trust that those of us who are involved in politics will make enough right decisions that it won't stress them out too much. But that's changed in the last 2 years. A whole bunch of people who thought they didn't care about politics discovered that politics cared about them. And all of a sudden, if they weren't paying attention, they could find themselves losing their rights, losing their privileges, having to adjust for things. So that created a whole series of stressors for them. But yeah, this is going to be new. it's going to be interesting as we try to get new uninvolved people in. It's going to be important that we don't turn them into cynics. It's going to be important that we do one of the things that David's promised to do with TBA, which is to educate them in the civics of Canadian politics. I'm always amazed at how many quasi-political people who are just starting to get political, are actually a little bit more aware of American politics than Canadian politics. Political parties, politicians, the media, all do a brutal job of educating Canadians on what's possible and what's going on out there. And so therefore, most of the time they don't care. And that's why, in a general election provincially, 50% of people don't vote. It's not that they don't care. They trust that the 50% of people who are paying more attention than them can make a good decision.
Well, and Vitor, I want to hit on this a little bit. Like, let's just talk a bit about how hard it is to get people involved. I just want the three of us to discuss for a moment just how hard it is to get people to spend $10 to buy a membership. Like, I don't think people comprehend the amount of work that the people like the three of us put into to just get a couple hundred people to go and vote. Like, we recently had a nomination meeting in Red Deer North here for Adriana LaGrange, the education minister. And there were a lot of people that were mad at the education minister. But I tell you, 400 people in Red Deer North could not be bothered to show up to vote her out. 400, and there were 900 members, and only 500, some of them voted.
But doesn't it take somebody organized to put their hat in the ring, to organize it, put a lot of effort? And then I feel like for a lot of people, it just feels like it doesn't matter. You elect whoever, and then they say one thing, and the next day they go do a completely different thing, and you're like, okay, well, that didn't work. The only thing I see changing, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm agreeing to this too, fellas, as I sit and I interview all the candidates and I have them on stage and I hear them say the same things, I feel like media doesn't hold them accountable right now, and that is changing, like, very, very fast. Now, if we go back through history, there's different times. It's a little bit of a cycle where media slowly becomes complicit, whether we go back to the paper or the radio, or you can do the math. Anyways, and with the internet, the fact we're able to do shows like this, it feels like we're hitting another point where if politicians stand up, say one thing, and then 2 months later are doing the complete opposite, they're going to get absolutely fried. And saying that, Justin Trudeau, our fearless leader of this country, gets to say whatever he wants and just walk away for at least the time being.
I mean, the average Albertan, the average Canadian, the average person has lost trust in their politicians. That is across the board. I think you can go anywhere in Canada and you can ask any person and ask them, what do you think of your politician? And they say, I don't trust them anymore. And I think that's pretty damning. And so now people are angry and governments are overthrown because of anger. We love governments that do very little and affect our lives at zero to none. When we see a government that gets their hands in the wrong cookie jars, so to speak, and are frustrating us as everyday Albertans, we want to make a difference. And I think we saw that with the leadership review with Jason Kenney. There were a lot of angry Albertans that said, I'm willing to drive down to Red Deer and vote and get rid of Jason Kenney. And I think TBA was a big proponent of pushing that narrative on people. But I think now that we've kind of moved out of that, now we don't have that so to speak baddie that we're looking at, the person that we can blame everything on. I think people may become apathetic to the cause, and like Vitor said, maybe just trust that the rest of us will do our due diligence and vote the right person in.
Well, I certainly hope you're right, because I feel like more people are tuning in than ever, but maybe it's just people such as myself that kind of had their hopes that everybody was doing right, and then all of a sudden we're in what we're in, and everybody's going, what on earth is happening? Fellas, with 124,000, just shy of that, 123 and change, people that are registered. So if for the folks listening, if you registered for a membership before August 12th, you can vote in the upcoming election. September 2nd, the ballots were sent out. So, if you've got one in the mail, you don't got one in the mail, by September 14th, they're saying if you don't have one, that's when you got to start to get worried, regardless. What are you expecting with mail-in ballots? The fact that on October 6th from 8 to noon in only 5 locations: Slave Lake, Edmonton, Red Deer, Calgary, Tabor. What are you expecting for voter turnout in this? I assume this is like unusual. It's never had a premier step down before. I mean, we have, but this feels pretty unusual to me. But maybe, what do you guys think on voter turnout, and then just overall the locations, not in person? There's a lot of questions there.
I'll run with it, and then I let everybody else run with it. But here's my math, and I'd love to hear your guys' math. My math is we're sitting at about 60 to 63% of the federal members will be voting in the leadership on the federal race. So that's with Pierre Poilievre, Roman Baber, Jean Charest. That federal race, it's done now. All the votes are in. It's about 430,000 votes, 420, 430. So I don't think we're going to see a higher turnout in the provincial leadership race than we saw in the federal one. And there's 123,000, 124, as you said, 123 or 124 and change, or whatever it is.
123,915. Yes.
Right. So if that's the case, then I don't see more than 75,000 people voting in this thing, to be honest.
Oh,
I don't.
I think you're high, honestly. I think you're going to see maybe a 50% voter turnout in the cities, if you're lucky. Again, we're hitting that time of the year where people are just getting back into the groove of things. Work is going. They couldn't be bothered, especially if there's only one polling station in your whole city. And let's be honest, that's if you live in Edmonton. If you have to drive to Slave Lake from Fort McMurray to vote, do you think you're going to drive in and vote? And how many people really trust the mail-in ballot right now? I think we could see maybe 60% in rural Alberta, just because they're more pissed off than everyone else. But I think when it comes to the actual voter turnout, if we see 55%, I'd be amazed.
So 55, let's just put that in perspective. 55%, 50% of 120 is 60,000, right? And 5 more would be six. So you're looking at, he's thinking 67,000 is a max.
As a max. And I don't think we're going to hit that. I think that's kind of a pipe dream. Vitor, what do you think?
I'm at 65,000, and it's not 123 and change. They sent us a new list the other day, so it's 124 and change.
Oh, so I got a wrong number. Perfect.
You got a wrong number. Don't worry about it.
No, but that was the old number. That was the number.
Yeah.
Now it's 120. Yeah.
And no, it'll be, I think it'll be roughly 65,000 people voting. There's a couple of things that people miss on this. Oftentimes, like, the number is in some ways a little padded because it's, the husband or the wife is particularly political and they sign up, their kids and their spouse who aren't as political and therefore are less likely to vote and might be away at the time when it comes. And then when you combine the fact that they're making it next to impossible to vote in person, that's going to drop stuff down. The fact that the ballots started arriving now right after a long weekend, it is just when people are starting to pay attention, but it's just when people are starting to pay attention. It's not 2 weeks from now when people are fully paying attention. People are still coming out of the summer mode. The fact that the membership sales ended in August was really weird. The fact that the party structured the leadership race in such a way that it demanded a ton of money from the candidates early and in effect left all the campaigns, every single one, including the front runner in the campaign, short on money because they had to give away all their money to the party early. So there's the amount of money being spent in this leadership race is way less than the amount that was spent in 2017. It's happening at the wrong time of year. It doesn't have anything, it's working off of a smaller base than the federal race with Pierre. Pierre has, $5 million to spend across the country because he's been able to raise that much. And therefore he's got tools at his disposal to lift the voter turnout. So that all of these things together lead me to believe that, we'll be a little bit better than 50% of the people voting, but not much.
When you say August 12th was weird, what's weird about August 12th being the end cutoff for memberships? Are you saying that it should have been earlier, later?
It should have been later. You cut off the memberships really early and delayed the vote really late. I mean,
I see this. I see this as a tactic, honestly, on the part of let's call them the establishment. We can call them Jason Kenney's people. We can call them the old guard. Whatever we want to call them. The tactic is pretty simple. Make it as boring as possible, because it's never good for an incumbent. Let's say when there's a lot of excitement around a race, because the incumbent is trying to maintain the status quo, while any new force, let's call it TBA, let's call it Brian, Gene, let's call it any group of people that's trying to, frankly, take over an organization, right? Take over the leadership of an organization, which what an election leadership is disadvantaged if people are bored and not paying attention. Because excitement is what gets people rolling on these kind of things.
You talk about taking on the establishment with Mike here helping Travis, Todd Lowen. Todd Lowen's a guy who stood up. He's an independent. Danielle Smith comes to mind. She's an outsider. They weren't in there. I mean, I can go on about all the candidates. The candidates are the candidates. I guess I look at it the opposite way, and I keep saying this analogy, and I apologize if we got any Calgary Flames fans listening, but with the Edmonton Oilers, forgive me bringing sports in this, they had Jay Woodcroft. He comes in as a coach. The Oilers aren't doing that hot. He gets a short runway to have an opportunity to get the Oilers into the playoffs, right? He does, and they become a hot team, and then they defeat the first round, maybe not the way they wanted to, but they're through it. Then the second round, they defeat the provincial rivals. And then, of course, they lose to the Colorado Avalanche. But now he's got a long contract. He's signed on that. And I look at the provincial election, everything they're trying to do isn't working, because I feel like there's a ton of hype around the 7 candidates. But maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe that's in my own world. It feels like that. It feels like all the eyes are sitting on Alberta right now, and they have this runway where they're literally campaigning, and then they get to have a few months where they're actually premier, and then they campaign again, and it's like a year-long campaign. I mean, it's almost the right place, the right perfect storm for whoever wins.
So it's kind of like that. I mean, there are sitting MLAs that will likely receive a seat, but I mean, Danielle Smith still doesn't have a seat. She's going to have to run in a by-election if she wants to even form government. And so anything that she wants to do, she's going to have to do through somebody else. And we know, and then to use your analogy with Jay Woodcroft, what would it be like if Jay Woodcroft was allowed to coach the Oilers, but only from afar, and Dave Tippett got to keep the reins while they played the playoffs? It'd be very weird. And that's what we have going on right now. We have Jason Kenney sitting behind the scenes doing all sorts of stuff that we have no clue. I mean, the amount of times that he opens his mouth and basically he cost us municipal elections. I would say some of his comments that federally, when we had the federal election, cost us votes. There's a lot of things this guy has done to blow up the conservative movement. And the question is, why are we continuing to give him rein to continue to blow up the conservative movement? And when you have a candidate like Danielle Smith, how are you going to defend that when you have a leader that's going to sit there and is likely going to be your deputy premier and not step down because he's got the power of all of the MLAs?
Well, that raises 2 questions. One, I assume it's in some way that it's written that this can happen. How can Danielle Smith run for the premier if she's not a sitting MLA?
Oh, I can.
She can, and there's a tradition that you go get yourself a seat really fast. But Danielle, there's a seat available. Danielle says she's not running in that seat. So we've got a complication happening there.
And there's a window, there's a time frame that they can call a by-election before an election. I mean, let's be honest. Do you want to be the person that has to put $1 million into a by-election prior to your election?
No, you don't call it at all. You just hold it off till I would say you just hold it off. But on that note, let's go.
Whoa, let's finish this for a second. I'm still confused.
That is not the tradition in Alberta. The tradition in Alberta is you get yourself a seat as fast as you can and get into the House so you can defend yourself.
Right.
And this is extra important when your first piece of legislation is super controversial and has everybody going, and so
well, not everybody, Vitor. Well, to be fair.
To be fair,
it has a bunch of people that don't even represent the majority of the membership going on.
Well, we'll find out where the membership is on this in the next little while. But she's got to designate somebody to be her defender and her spokesman for this thing in November and December when it gets voted on.
So if she wins, you got to paint me a clear picture. Some days, boys, I'm a little dense.
I'll do it, Shaun. I understand what you're
if she wins the premier, right? She becomes premier on October 6th, but she's not a sitting MLA. What happens?
Here, so I'll explain this. So in the Westminster system, being premier actually doesn't have anything to do with a seat in the legislature or parliament. What it does have to do with is, are you the leader of the party that has the most seats? If you are the leader elected by the membership, which is kind of think of it as a club, right? So if the head of the club is elected by the members of the club and that club has the most seats, then that person is the premier of the province. There's no legislation that requires that the premier have a seat. However, as Vitor pointed out, traditionally, they try to get a seat as fast as possible after that happens. Now, most of the time, almost all of the time, they already have a seat. It's very rare. It doesn't happen very often that the leader of the party doesn't have a seat, but it has happened before. And as Vitor pointed out, they go to get a seat as fast as possible.
So if she wins, can she interact with all the MLAs, everything? Can she be like running the province, or does she have to sit on the outside?
Yes and no, because again, she's not allowed inside the legislature. So when bills and things are passed,
what do you mean? I'm allowed inside the legislature.
Well, yeah, but she can't actually make any.
She can't
any
vote.
Decrees.
All she can't do is vote, is what you're saying. And
Or speak.
Right, or speak, or defend herself from Notley's attacks for the next 6 months. I mean, she's going to be sitting there taking and have to have a press conference every day to defend everything that the NDP is throwing at her, and it's going to be very difficult for her to do so. And so, as anyone who's looking at this, there's a lot of things that the UCP have done wrong, and this stems from Kenny staying too long. And the fact is that he's still staying too long, and he will exert his power. We know that, and we are interested to see where this is going to go, because ultimately she's not the only one. I'm not saying Leela will ever win, but Leela could lose her seat as well. Now she could sit there, but now she could be an elected official, but not have a seat in Chestermere because she's about to lose that seat. So there's a lot of weird things going on behind the scenes.
Well, yeah, for example, I mean, Todd Loewen isn't even a member of the UCP caucus right now, and they might just not let him in if he wins. That could happen as well.
So there could definitely be that. I know from the party allowing him to run as a candidate, they've already said that he is allowed to be a part of the Conservative Party. He's a member within good standing, so he himself could have that, and he has a seat. So it's just a matter of the caucus saying, "Hey, bring him in." And because
here's the most likely outcome, just like what happened with Jason Kenney, who didn't have a seat before he became leader of the UCP. Immediately, an MLA resigned, and he ran for the nomination and the seat there. So that could also be a very quick fix for Danielle. I think we have to be careful on painting it as if it's going to be too much of a challenge, because it's definitely a hurdle that's been overcome many times. However, it is definitely a challenge that she faces that the other candidates don't face at all.
And another oddity in this weird election, this weird, I don't know, what has it been, guys? 8 months? Like, it just feels like this weird
It's been 10 years, wouldn't you say? 10 years?
Yeah. Feels like that.
No, an actual 10 years. From the time the Wild Rose lost to Redford till now has been a decade of craziness in Alberta politics.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
So nothing about what's going on right now. Half the time I'm laughing because if you're listening, you can't see this, but half the time someone will say something, everybody's nodding their head like, yeah, that's 100%. And when we talk about this election, none of you are going like, oh, this is the playbook. This is exactly how it's supposed to go. There's a lot going on right now that makes zero sense.
There's tons going on.
Yeah, tons. It makes sense. Let's take this for example. Right now, the party has said that they will close nominations for CAs. So we have, I believe, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong on this, about 38 seats that have been confirmed of the 87, which is great, except if the party wants to close nominations, it means that any candidate that would like to run, let's say it's a contested nomination, it might take another 2 months for them. So we're talking January, maybe even February before we have a nominated contestant in a CA to run against somebody who is running against an incumbent NDP, let's say in Edmonton, because there's 19 seats that are like that here in Edmonton, and we've only called for 3, and I think we have 1 that's in the works, and that one's not even going to be allowed to be opened up until February at best, probably. And so we have some huge issues with the the governance of our party and the party's actual board, and saying, why are these decisions being made? And maybe the two of you can address some of this, but I mean, there's some crazy stuff going on behind the scenes for sure.
I don't have an answer for why it's happening, but I acknowledge that it's a real problem. And there are broken things structurally in the party. Some of the party's decisions don't make sense to me, other than insiders put their thumb on the scales for certain reasons, and now the insiders are kind of they don't even know who to take instructions from, and there's a bunch of thumbs looking for scales to press, even though they don't really know which scales to press. So that it's a complicated mess, and in some ways, this is a consequence of Jason Kenney, because the party became a cult of personality. It didn't need to be, shouldn't have become one. It shouldn't have headed in that direction, but that's what it did. And then when the members removed Jason Kenney by giving him a result that was so small that he couldn't survive, frankly, my guy fought tooth and nail to get Jason Kenney to step down and create an interim. Danielle announced on the same day that no, Jason Kenney should stay. Now she's dealing with the consequences of supporting Jason Kenney staying, because Jason Kenney's interfering in the race the way everybody knew he would. There's some really big personalities in this. The personalities have in some ways overcome the structures of the party that should have been around to protect the grassroots and to create a system that's grassroots positive and that allows normal everyday members and even normal everyday MLAs to have their influence. So we've got a confused bit of mess right now, and we've got to fix it. And then even when you go into this actual leadership race, think right now about just a little bit less than half of the MLAs haven't endorsed anybody, because they're looking at this and going, and and for those of you, if you're on radio, you didn't see my eyes go super wide and my hands go all jazzy, because that's what's happened. A whole bunch of normal people who normally understand politics and kind of make sense of it are struggling to make sense of the odd things that are going on. And
go ahead.
Sorry, David. Yeah, I was going to say, just even the endorsements, right? Like, I mean, there are some endorsements that are coming out there that I would never have touched with a 10-foot pole if you're trying to be the person that's standing up for freedoms and stepping away from mandates. And then you take Casey Madu, and let's be honest, I was his former president, but you never take his I'm sorry, I'm just at a loss for words why Daniel would even accept his endorsement. It just makes no sense to me that someone in that light who locked up pastors is now endorsing the Freedom Central candidate. It just makes no sense to me.
Yeah, I'm not going to defend any decisions by any candidates, but I will say that Jason Kenney raped democracy in front of all of us. And the fact that most people are unaware of that is really the problem here, right? Jason Kenney's violation of our democratic institutions have left a party that doesn't know what principle means anymore, and so is just doing things to win. We've lost the sacredness of democracy in this province. And I use the word rape very specifically here because what people don't understand is the significance of what it means to change the day and method of a vote. I'd like both of you to just reflect on it and verbally with the listeners what it means to cancel and change the method of a vote. Have you ever seen it before for anything?
Never. I mean, it was unfathomable to think that you have a party that people have lost trust in their leader, and then right before the vote, you tell everyone, "Oh, don't worry, we're opening it up because we want more people to vote." I mean, it made no sense why anyone would do it, and I understand people's frustrations, and that's why I think so many Albertans are still upset and have lost trust with the status quo. And so there are a ton of candidates that are trying to run off of Jason Kenney's record, and I don't think that's going to help them at all. And so the three of us that are sitting here, I mean, we all support candidates that are not in that status quo, and there's a reason for that. And there's a reason why you see those numbers of those candidates slipping, whereas these candidates have an influx in people coming and saying, you know what, I've been looking at it, and maybe I didn't know who you were to begin with, but now you're the person that I need to vote. And especially in a preferential ballot where people have say on multiple candidates, this is going to be very powerful because, yeah, maybe your first person doesn't get in, but they're going to still have to decide who the next premier is.
Let's talk about preferential ballot. I think for myself and a lot of the listeners, do I got to vote for all 7 guys? Do I got to vote for one? Well, how does it work?
Let me start, because whether or not you vote for all 7,
some of this
depends on whether you're voting for something or you're voting against something or some mix of the two. If you're only voting for a candidate, or you have a candidate and a second choice, and after that you don't care what happens if it isn't your candidate or the second choice, then maybe you can only vote 1 and 2. But if there's somebody on the list that you don't want to win, then you owe it to yourself to vote at least 1 through 7 or 1 through 6 and leave that person at the back of the list, because this process is more complicated than everybody thinks. So you're voting your preferences. So if you don't get your first choice, your vote moves to your second choice. And if your second choice is removed, your vote moves to your third choice. And everybody kind of understands that. The part they miss is if your ballot becomes what's called spent, there are no longer any choices on your ballot that are still running, your ballot no longer counts. And for every 2 people whose ballot no longer counts, the number of votes the first place person needs to win goes down by 1. And this is where sometimes somebody will say, I can't stand candidate X, so I'm going to vote for candidates, W and Z, and I'm just not going to vote other than that. And what they don't understand is if candidate X that they can't stand is in first place and they only voted for W and Z, and if W and Z don't make that final ballot, their vote no longer counts. But not only does their vote no longer count, the denominator that the candidate they don't like needs has gone down by 1. So the number of votes that the candidate they don't like needs to win has gone down by half a vote. So
let me try to explain what Vitor is saying in another angle, and then Mike, why don't you try another angle, and maybe we'll actually be able to explain this, because it is. I think
they're all looking at me, and I'm going,
So the way that I think of ranked ballots is if you just think of it as like a room full of people, okay? And at the beginning, everyone goes to their favorite captain. So let's say we have Brian Jean, Todd Lowen, Travis Taves, Danielle Smith, Rajan Sani, all 7, and they have their little camps of people. Now, the way that the rules work is the person with the least amount of people around them, those people have to go and join other little groups, right? And so only the people of the smallest group has to do that. But then after that, you have to keep doing it until one group is 51 out of 100 in the room. So imagine it like each of the candidates is standing in the room surrounded by their supporters. And so let's say from the polling that Take Back Alberta has done, I'll just pull that up for a moment here. Let's just say that Rajan Sani is the first one. And let's say that she has one person in the room. So it's her and one other person. And then Leela has 11 and Todd has 20. And so when Rajan falls off, her one person could go to Leela or it could go to anyone. But nobody else's is recounted until their number 1 falls off. That's the way that I like to think about it.
But let me add one other hiccup to that. It's not just that they go to the different tables. It's that they can leave the room.
Yes, that's perfect. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
And once they've left the room, you don't need 51 to win. You need a smaller amount. So I
need 50.
Yeah. So using our numbers, we said 65,000. So let's say we need about 32,000 votes to win. So after the first ballot drops off, we're likely to think that the first 3 to come off are going to be the girls in Calgary. And, I don't have the polling numbers in front of me, but let's just say it's 10% between them, right? That 10% has to get spread around the other remaining candidates. So there's going to be 4 candidates, and not every candidate is going to get equal amount of that share, and not every candidate is going to get all of the votes for one candidate. So what's going to happen is it might be by the time we're on the 4th ballot, we might only need, let's say, 30,000 votes to now get elected. And then let's say a bunch of people drop off on the next one, and then all of a sudden maybe we only need 27,000. So it's very important that if you really don't want someone to get elected, to definitely put down your lists all the way and make sure you leave them at the bottom. If you are so hell-bent on just voting for one candidate and you're only going to put one candidate, the problem is the candidate you don't want, you're also voting for technically by allowing their numbers to dissipate as you leave the room.
That's great. Yeah.
Geez, I might be dense, folks. Just so I'm clear here, okay? I rank 1 through 7. If my candidate has the lowest number of 1s, then that moves on to my 1 gets wiped off, and my 2 becomes a 1 for somebody else.
Yes.
Correct.
But if my 1 stays and number 7, 6, 5, etc. is the first to go, it gets wiped off my ballot as well.
Yes.
So the simple acknowledgement is if you're a front runner, there's really no real reason to put anyone else on the bottom of your ballot because there's not much to do. I mean, if you're sticking around, and let's just use the 2-3 front runners that we're suggesting that are in there as, Smith, Taves, and Jean, if they're the supposed front runners and they want to win, they think that they're going to win. So if you're 1 and 2, you're going to be going head to head. It won't matter who Taves or Smith's votes go to, but it does matter a lot if Jean is in 3rd for him to make sure that his votes go somewhere, because he essentially is going to be the kingmaker and get to decide who gets to be premier. And by that, I mean that his voters will be. And obviously the campaigns can support their individuals to vote a certain way. Again, we don't tell people how to vote, but they generally do tend to vote in certain waves. And so let's say Brian's voters unanimously say we don't like Danielle Smith and go on the Taves camp, then congratulations, Travis Taves will be your next premier. And on vice versa, if that doesn't happen and it goes the other way, then we've got Danielle Smith. And so ultimately, it really behooves any candidates that aren't polling in 1 and 2 to really think about who their number 2s should be on their list, because it's going to be very important to deciding who the next premier is.
Well, I'd
like to say one other thing, and,
sure.
and it's being kind of written off here. If at the very first, when the room splits, 51 are on one side and 49 are on the other, that person wins and there's no more votes.
Yep.
So if somebody gets 51% of first place votes, it's over.
It's over.
Yeah, at any point in those 7 votes.
Yeah.
But it's likely not going to happen.
Majority of people in the room are with one candidate, then that candidate's won.
But all of that is correct. The part I just want to drive home again is that you can take a model where, say the front runners only got 43% of the vote on the first ballot. And on the 4th ballot, with 43% of the vote, they win. Yes. Without having added a single extra vote, just because people dropped off and their voters dropped off, that 43 out of 100 wasn't good enough to win, but 43 out of 85 now makes you win.
Yeah. And let's talk about the Ed Stelmach factor, right? We've seen this happen in a number of UCP conservative elections in Alberta, where the person who wasn't in 1st or 2nd ends up winning the premier. And that's because we have to recognize that at some point, there's an opportunity for all those bottom feeders, I'm just going to call them that, to build it all the way up and say, you know what? We're not going to vote that. And so if everyone says, hey, Todd Lowinden is the second best guy on my ballot for everyone, and all of a sudden he collects all of those, he might jump over Danielle and he might jump over Jean to be against Travis at the end. And so it does make sense that if you are in the top 3, not to just leave one individual on there, because you never know. It is a messy vote, but it is lots of fun for us political nerds to watch, because we can strategize all day long.
So true.
Here's a personal question. You don't need to say who you're voting for, because I don't really care. Will you put 7 names down, or do you put down 2, 4, 5? What's your strategy? What do you guys do? The political junkies, do you put 7, 1? Where do you go?
I always fill out my ballot, and I actually always start backwards. The person I don't want to win, I put them in the lowest spot. And then I think about the remaining person I don't want to win and put them in the lowest spot. And usually it's pretty easy after that. Like the middle ones probably don't matter to me too much. Then I care about, who I want first and who I want second. But I want to make sure that somehow I'm not accidentally voting for the person I don't want to have win. And so by just putting them in the bottom spot, I know that nothing's going to happen, that my vote's going to help them carry them over the top in any way, shape, or form.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, that's a good. If you really care about who wins, then you should fill out your whole ballot.
Yep. You don't want to leave it to chance.
I appreciate that, because I've thought about that question a lot. Like, what do? You guys are three guys who stare at this an awful lot, so I appreciate that. As time slowly ticks away here, I want to talk about what's the safest way to vote to have a voting ballot? Is it mail? Is it online? Is it in person? What are your guys' thoughts?
In person, but you have to have lots of polling stations.
Yeah.
So why, folks, do we only have 5 polling stations?
So I have a question for you, Shaun. Why did Jason Kenney rape democracy?
The question, I think, Shaun, is why do we only have 5 polling stations? Because there are 40,000 votes coming out of Calgary, and there are just shy of 20,000 coming out of Edmonton. So if you've got 60,000 votes in one city where it takes you 45 minutes to drive to a polling station, you can do it. If what are we at, 65%? Is that what the rural vote is? Something like that? If 65% of rural Albertans can decide who the next premier is, but now have to drive to Slave Lake or Tabor to go vote, it's going to be very difficult to get that 65% of people to stay out and vote.
So you're saying it's a tactic?
100%.
It's a suppression tactic. It is a voter suppression tactic.
I'm going to use bullshit on this again to whoever is listening, because you want to sow unity together in a population when we already know we got a split in rural and urban, and lots of people talking about it, and then you don't put a polling station, whether right or wrong. I should point this out, whether people are against mail-in or not. Right now, I think we can all agree, nobody wants to mail their vote in. Not only is it a little bit complicated, and it's not that complicated. I'm not acting like it's calculus here or something. We're sending a rocket to the moon, but you got to sign a declaration. You gotta print off your photo ID. Then you got to fill it out properly. And if you get any of those things wrong, it's disqualified. If it doesn't show up on time, it's disqualified. So you can understand why people such as myself want to walk it in and go, here, this is it. There's my ID. Boom, sign it off. And then you find out you have one of 5 locations, and wait, only 4 hours to get there. 8 to noon on October 6th. Like, I'm sorry. What on earth is that? You're trying to get the rural population, and last time I checked, I live in Lloyd. It's not like it's, the boonies. We have a constituency here. We have MLAs. We're just as part of democracy, I think, as anyone else. And yet, boys, here we sit. Like, to me,
well, Shaun, let me ask you, as the person who lives in Lloyd, do you know where you have to vote if you want to vote in person?
Well, Edmonton, I assume.
Yeah, it's the closest.
Is it going to be closest, or is it based on the riding?
You can go to any polling station.
Any polling station, yeah. I wasn't sure if they had said that. They were debating on not doing that and making you drive to Red Deer to go and vote, which would have been lots of fun.
Like, I look forward to tearing someone a new one here at some point, because, like, I just don't get it though, guys. Like, I'm serious. To me, you got a very important thing. We're talking about voter turnout. Everyone's like, maybe 65%. As we say that, then we get to the point, okay, what's the safest way? In person. Okay, let's put 5 polling stations, because that makes sense.
For 4 hours.
For 4 hours.
Only in the morning on a Thursday.
Yeah, so don't you worry about your farm or your animals. Don't worry about that. And by the way, you live in Fort McMurray, and you've got to drive to Slave Lake. How far is that drive, Vitor?
433 kilometers.
So 4 hours.
You will have to break the speed limit to get there in time to vote if you leave at 8 a.m.
Yeah.
And not to mention, Vitor, it'll be October, and I love our province and our country, but who knows what type of weather we're going to be dealing with then. Like, and I love Canadians. We will drive through literally anything if we deem it important. And I tell you what, like, I'm almost wondering if it's not going to be a Wednesday night. Hey guys, come, let's meet. Let's have a little fun at a hotel in Edmonton, and
I think
get
that's going to
together,
be what it's going
network,
to have to be.
and
That's what it's
then
gonna
get
have
up
to
and
be.
go vote and go home the next day. Because to me, this is like, I don't know, this is insane.
Well, that's going to be my messaging. I have 5 big Take Back Alberta events: Bonnyville, Edmonton, Red Deer, Calgary, Lethbridge this month. And my message to them is going to be, make it a camp out. You guys were all going to go into Red Deer with $100, right? Okay, they're trying to stop you from voting. Make them feel pain for it. They're trying to restrict you. Show them that you can beat them with effort, right? And it's not going to work for everybody, but my message has always been the same. If you want change, if you're not happy with the status quo, all 3 of us here want change. Maybe a different candidate.
All
but we
all four of us want change.
There we go. Perfect. I didn't want to
Perfect.
speak for the host because, the host usually tries. But yes, all 4 of us want change. And everyone that we've talked to says they do too. So it's going to take a little bit of extra effort because they're trying to cheat, but we can still beat them.
Well, and let's be clear. You can, if you have the concern about having to drive 4 hours to a voting station, you can still do a mail-in ballot. We're not discrediting anyone who wants to do it. Just make sure you do it correctly. That's the biggest thing. So don't spoil your ballot. And if you're concerned about spoiling that ballot, maybe talk to the candidate or the campaign that you're working with to have them help you out to make sure that it's done correctly. Because the worst thing would be is that you put all that effort in, you think you voted, but little do we know, you actually didn't vote because you forgot to put your ID in it.
Yeah, well, let's clear up a couple things. I agree with you, Mike. As I tirade here a little bit on voting spots and everything else, I just go back to what's the most secure: in person. I like in person. In today's day and age, and some of the things that have been going on, I think a lot of the world, right or wrong, is skeptical of mail-in. Right? I just think they are. But here's some dates for you, okay? So if you're listening to this and you bought a UCP membership before August 12th or on August 12th or earlier, you're going to have a mail-in ballot coming to you. So they were sent on September 2nd, and if you don't see one in the mail by September 14th, that's when you got to start being worried. It has to be into them by October 3rd to be considered valid. And in it, there's steps on the UCP website that basically say you have to sign a declaration, you have to print your photo ID off, and then you have to fill it out properly. Put it all in an envelope, sign and seal, and away it goes. So it's not like you can't. I agree with you. I just look at it and go, we all feel way more comfortable if we could drive half an hour, heck, an hour in Canada and go put it in person, show your ID, and away you go, right? I get the rest of it. One of the things that I think David brought up at the start, what I'm hearing is different candidates are going to do a tour of Alberta, kind of doing you give us your vote, sign and seal it, we'll make sure it gets delivered. I don't know how that's going to go, but I understand the thought process behind it, considering they're trying to make sure people fill it out and get it there on time.
As long as we don't have a mule issue, we'll be fine.
Yeah, that's got to be something that we should mention before we go into those details, which is there's got to be a lot of eyes on this, and there's got to be so if you even can think of a way that Jason Kenney and his cronies could cheat on this, bring it up. Email the party. Harass them. Say, I don't like the rules in this way. There are lawyers in the party. Read the rules and say, I think these are ways that could be cheated. Like, shine light on this situation. This is not some great, dark, nefarious group of geniuses. Look, they're not that bright. Like, they can be beat. But we need strength in numbers, guys. Strength in numbers. With enough people paying attention to this, we can make sure it's a fair process. If we get a fair process, we might get a little bit more trust in our leaders. And if we get a little bit more trust, maybe we can rebuild this and stop the socialists from destroying the place we love.
Any final thoughts, fellas, from you guys? I want to make sure we have you out on time. But I appreciate you doing the first roundtable. Hopefully we don't get booted for this, and if we do, it wouldn't be anything new from where I'm sitting. But regardless, appreciate you guys doing this. Is there any final thoughts or any thoughts for any the members, people voting, that you want to make sure they know as the date closes in? Because I mean, we're under a month now, and we're gonna see where it goes.
You're actually bringing up an important point about one of the unfairnesses of a mail-in ballot. literally people have to mail in their ballots. And if they're in rural parts of Alberta, they probably should mail them in earlier rather than later, which means that they have to make their decisions with less information than somebody who can go into Edmonton or Calgary on the last day and vote. And I live in terror of us getting something like the situation that happened in Calgary with the city councillor, where he won because of the early votes, because there were things that got announced in the last few days that basically wiped out his ability to win the election with anybody who was voting on election day. This process, this very, very long voting process, is it makes it harder. People in outside the two big cities have to vote early and just trust that things won't evolve and it won't change their methods. So I'm not telling everybody you don't have to rush and put your ballot in the very first day. You still have time. Your ballot's got to get to Calgary now. But pay attention. There's still going to be a fair amount of politics in the next week and a half, 2 weeks. Unless you're absolutely rock solid on how you're voting, watch for a few more days before you cast your ballot, because I think there's value in trying to vote with as much information as possible. I think in the long run, that's probably a good thing for the party, good thing for democracy. But
especially if you're ranking 7 people.
Yeah, but this wouldn't have been the process I would have chosen for doing what we did.
Well, I appreciate you guys coming on and doing this with me. Thanks again, fellas. And
I got one last thing I'd like to say.
Sure.
Just from
squeezing in under the buzzer.
Just speaking from the perspective of Take Back Alberta, I just encourage every single person to please do your civic responsibility and put the extra effort in. People like Mike Vitor and I, we're used to you not putting in the effort. And that's why we're like, oh, this needs to be easier. They shouldn't have to travel. We want to make it as easy as possible. And that's all true. But we've just shown you that they're making it hard for you to vote. I think you should give them a big middle finger and say, I don't care that you're making it hard. I'm going to do this. And if that means taking a day, if you can, if it means whatever you need to do, make sure that vote gets cast.
Just look at it like it's a night out, take a day off work, drive up, have a nice supper, couple sips of something, and go to bed early, late, whatever you want. Wake up, go cast a ballot, and carry on. To me, we spend, all of us will spend money on interesting things. And whether that's, a ticket going to the Oiler game or whatever your fancy is, we'll put our money where we want to go. And so for this one, I'm hoping all of you are proven wrong with your 65% voter turnout. I hope it's higher than that. That's my hope, but we'll see.
Well, and I think there's one other thing that we're missing here is after the 8th, we're going to have a new premier, and we all have to get on board because we've got 9 months, less than 9 months now. It'll be 8 months that we've got to prepare ourselves for another election. And so don't take your tools or your toys and go play with somebody else just because your candidate doesn't get in. I think there's a lot of people that are going to be frustrated with the outcome of this election because they're going to be voting for some person and they're not going to get in. But it doesn't mean that the conservative movement has to be died.
I'm not quite
only
one of seven
can win, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And at the end of the day, they have to be a team. That's what we said on the stage in Vermilion, right? One of you wins, but then you got to move on. You're a team, and you got to figure this out because then comes Rachel Notley. And in saying that, if Rachel Notley is listening to this or her team, I would love nothing more than to hear what the NDP have to say because to me, one of the problems we have in democracy right now is we don't listen to anyone, and it would be very interesting to have the Premier of Alberta and Rachel Notley sit down and have a discussion and let the people of Alberta hear it. Wouldn't that be something
that would be
wild to do?
Well, great. I think you've just laid down the gauntlet, so I'm looking forward to hearing the conversations as you're about to start.
Notley's actually willing to talk to Albertans, or only the ones that agree with her.
Well, I think Rachel Notley at some point, if she's going to win, has to talk to people. It's just whether she feels like she's going to get a fair shake, and I can safely say I'm going to give anyone who comes on here a fair shake.
I believe
that's as simple as that.
Yeah.
But
thanks for having us, Shaun. I really appreciate you taking the time to have us on too.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you boys hopping on and exploring an idea with me. It's at least helped me in the hour figure out a few different things as the election comes closer and as the mail-in ballots are going to be getting in the mailboxes and everything else. I hope it's helped some of the 60,000 or the 120,000, whether they knew some of these things or not. Either way, fellas, appreciate you hopping on for the roundtable, and we'll see you on the other side.
Sounds
Thanks,
good.
Shaun.
Thank you so much.